Great Zimbabwe's name refers to houses of stone, but the site contains no houses in the ordinary sense of the word. Instead, massive stone walls snake across the landscape, enclosing areas both large and small. Piles of tumbled stones mark the places where other walls once stood. These enclosures and walls are the remains of the city that once dominated the Zimbabwe plateau. Great Zimbabwe is in the south-central region of modern-day Zimbabwe, 17 miles southeast of the town of Masvingo, in an area where climate and resources were favorable to settlers. The site is more than 3,000 feet above sea level, cooler than the hot coastal plain. It is free of the tsetse fly, which in many other parts of Africa infects both humans and livestock with disease-causing parasites. The plateau's grassy plains were ideal for cattle grazing, and its scattered trees and forests provided the builders of Great Zimbabwe with timber for fuel and construction. Granite hills and rock outcroppings yielded gold, iron, copper, and tin. Equally important was the granite itself, which cracks in a process that geologists call exfoliation. The change in temperature between the warm days and chilly nights causes the rock to split into natural building blocks, flat-sided slabs between 3 and 7 inches thick. The people of the plateau learned to speed up the production of these slabs by heating the surface of the granite with fire, and then cooling it suddenly with water. Many thousands of stones went into the building of Great Zimbabwe. The sprawling site covers about 1,800 acres, which archaeologists have divided into 3 general areas: the hill, the valley, and the outer city. The first site that greets visitors is the hill. Its steep sides rise 260 feet above the surrounding landscape, and its summit is crowned with many rock formations. Walls run between natural outcrops and boulders, creating a network of small passageways and enclosures. Like all structures at Great Zimbabwe, these are open to the sky. Archaeologists have found no evidence that the site's stone structures had roofs. Instead, the enclosures are thought to have contained small thatched roof structures made of daka, a type of soil containing clay and gravel that is a common African building material. Large pits near Great Zimbabwe provided daka for the site. At one end of the hill is a walled area called the Eastern Enclosure that once held many monoliths, or standing stones and pillars. The tops of some of these pillars were carved as birds, which may have represented individual rulers of Great Zimbabwe. From the Eastern Enclosure, a narrow passage climbs between boulders up to the balcony, the highest enclosure on the hill. It offers a view down over the Eastern Enclosure, and below it, the spreading valley. About 200 feet away is the larger Western Enclosure, ringed by 2 curving stone walls that are 26 feet at their highest point and 16 feet at their widest. These walls, like many at Great Zimbabwe, are really 2 walls in one, an inner and an outer wall made of slabs laid in courses, or layers, with loose stone, dirt, and gravel filling the space between them. The slabs fit snugly together, without the use of mortar. Monoliths and turrets once stood at intervals along the top of the Western Enclosure's walls. Within the enclosure, excavators have found layers of daka floors, broken pottery, and other signs that the site was continuously occupied for many years. Most archaeologists today believe that the hill was the seat of royal power in Great Zimbabwe. The Western Enclosure probably housed kings or chiefs. The Eastern Enclosure may have been a religious or ritual place where sacred emblems, symbolic objects such as the monoliths and carved birds, were displayed. South of the hill lies the valley. It contains about a dozen enclosures ringed or partly ringed by stone walls. Several major archaeological projects at Great Zimbabwe have focused on these ruins. In 1929, Gertrude Cotton Thompson methodically excavated one of them and correctly concluded that it was African in origin and that it dated from the medieval, not the ancient, period. In another enclosure, which Hall excavated in 1903, was a great hoard of artifacts. The valley enclosures tell a story in stonework of Great Zimbabwe's rise and decline. The architect Anthony Whitty studied these enclosures in the 1950s and identified 3 main construction styles, each from a different phase of Great Zimbabwe's history. The oldest phase features crude stonework, untrimmed stones laid in irregular or uneven courses. This phase probably began around 1300. During the second phase, in the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe's builders produced their finest walls, using stones that had been carefully trimmed to fit neatly together and laying them in even courses, sometimes setting them in decorative patterns such as zigzags or chevrons, a V-shaped design. During the third phase, in the 15th century, the quality of stonework declined for unknown reasons. Walls were made of irregularly sized stones, sometimes piled crudely together or forcefully wedged into place. The focal point of the valley is the largest African stone ruin south of the Sahara Desert. Known as the Great Enclosure, this oval space is surrounded by an 800-foot-long wall, 32 feet high and 17 feet thick in places. The massive wall is thicker at the bottom than at the top, making it very stable. Along part of the enclosure, an inner wall runs parallel to the main wall, with a deep, narrow passageway between the two. This passageway leads to the great enclosure's most striking feature, the conical tower. This solid, cone-shaped structure is 30 feet high and 18 feet across at the base. The great enclosure also contains a number of smaller enclosures and doka platforms. The purpose of the great enclosure, like much else about Great Zimbabwe, has been widely debated. Various investigators have identified it as a temple, the residence of the king's wives, or a private community set aside for members of the royal court or other elite citizens. The archaeologist Thomas Huffman has suggested that the great enclosure may have been a school where young women underwent training and rituals to prepare them for initiation into adult society. He bases this suggestion on the fact that some African cultures in the region maintain such schools today, and have done so for generations. Beyond the valley enclosures is the outer city, the least known part of the site. Once the densely crowded home of most of Great Zimbabwe's inhabitants, today it consists mostly of the remains of dhaka huts, with occasional stone enclosures scattered about the surrounding countryside. Based on his examination of the site, Huffman has estimated that Great Zimbabwe could have housed as many as 18,000 people at its peak, making it a true urban center in the midst of medieval southern Africa. When Europeans encountered Great Zimbabwe in the late 19th century, they felt an awe, inspired by their mistaken ideas about the mysterious and exotic origins of the ruins. Modern archaeology has given us a more accurate view of Great Zimbabwe's origins and history, but the site remains as impressive and as ever, a massive memorial to an African past that is still being uncovered. The Zimbabwean government administers Great Zimbabwe as a national monument, and in 1986 the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, named Great Zimbabwe a World Heritage Site in recognition of its unique and valuable place in cultural and archaeological history.